How much do you end up relying on kind of alternately? How much do you end up resetting your vision of some of your own players or some of your own prospects based on somebody fishing around for them? Or does that happen where you're like,
Dramatically. I
right, where
think
you're like, we
dramatically.
didn't think that much of this guy, but
mm,
why the hell is everybody calling about him?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and so, John, I think there's a few outshoots of that. One outshoot is, and this is kind of tying back to what Aaron just asked as well, is I think there's this now notion in negotiations that whatever you say you'll do, you also will do more if you're buying. And whatever I say I'll do, I'll also do less if I'm selling or something like that. So that what transpires in these deals is when I call you and say, hey, would you talk about this player? And you say yes, and then I say, okay, so well, who would you want from us? And you say, well, it'd have to be one of these three guys. We would just immediately say, well, no, we wouldn't do any of those guys before we even ask. So like the cadence is like you say, hey, would you do one of these three guys? I say that would be too rich. Then I go back to the room and say, hey, coincidentally, who the heck is this third guy that you even asked for?
Right.
Right. So it's like, is this notion that I have to reject your first offer regardless of what it is. And so, and this is tying back to what Aaron said in terms of like when you ask for players and why, it's like sometimes we just get that first offer out of the way. Maybe it's one guy that we really wanted, but two guys we're not that interested in. We hold back on the three guys we really want in the deal because we know they have to say no to start with. But John, to address your question, absolutely. Like in this system, there's no better feedback than the systems other teams have. So when we say we're going to take, uh, you know, I guess an example was when we were, and these deals didn't really work out for us when we acquired Tyler Mahle and Lopez from Baltimore. But those teams tell you, okay, these types of players would have to be in the deal. And usually it's pretty well aligned with your assessment of your system. But sometimes you'll find like, oh, wow, there's one guy that we keep hearing in this trade deadline who we kind of have as like, let's just say like in a B C group of prospects, but they're referring to him with the guys that we have in the A's. I think that's what we call that crowdsourcing. Like we do want to get feedback from other teams, and we aren't so proud to not then move that guy up our board a little bit when we get the feedback. Don Welke, who was a longtime scout who I had a chance to work with, he always said like, "Hey, the easiest scouting report is watching how hitters hit a pitcher. They'll let you know how good this stuff is." Like you can have a scout tell you, hey, this guy's slider is awesome. But if everybody's hitting it, it's probably not that tough to hit. If a guy's throwing 88 but somehow doesn't get hit, his stuff is playing better. The scouting report doesn't look that good. Well, I think we treat other general managers the same way. When you consistently hear, maybe when it's a one off, you take note. When you hear it more than once, I'll cite one guy, and we ultimately did trade Spencer Steer. Spencer Steer was a player that we heard multiple times that trade cycle. We really liked Spencer Steer. The industry really, really liked Spencer Steer. And so at those times, I think you need to go back to the drawing board and determine A, are we missing something? And if so, like, let's make an adjustment. Or B, maybe they're missing something and now's the time to capitalize on trading a player like that because we're all seeking these opportunities to sell high and buy low. It's so rare to be able to do that. But there are times when the industry does value your players differently than you do. You either have to learn from that and adjust, or you have to take advantage of that and strike.
I'm glad you mentioned Steer because I wanted to because we've talked about him and Encarnacion Strand and a number of other times when prospects are traded as a prototype. And I'd want to know what your thoughts are on this, whether or not it's fair to say, which is a lot of times the guys who end up being targeted by other teams or targeted at the trade deadline are players who that year have raised their prospect capital significantly. That they are long term, they might still not be one of the top 100 prospects, or they're certainly not in the top, 20 to 40 or 50 or something. But they might have just barely entered 100 because they were sort of under siege. They are the prospects with steam. You know what I mean? It ends up being the ones that seem to be targeted at the trade deadline, the ones that everybody's kind of getting a little bit carried away with in the industry. And my question is there anything to that? Like, do you feel like that people overreact a little bit, or people at the trade deadline or on other teams overreact a little bit to your players that are a little bit better than everybody thought? They kind of get carried away with them. And frankly, do you guys find yourselves doing the same thing with
You
other
know,
other players as well, or is that, or are we overstating that?
I don't think you're overstating that. And I'll add one additional wrinkle that maybe you didn't allude to here is, when we look at the national scouting reports on systems, so like Major League Baseball has their rankings of your minor league systems and a prospect list for each team, and so does Baseball Prospectus
Sure.
and Baseball. They're all out there. Baseball America and Fangraphs. One of the kind of, I would say, a little bit low hanging fruit, dare I say, cheap ways of negotiating is calling a team up and saying, "Okay, you have interest in our seventh inning reliever. We're selling. You know what we'll do? Like, we're going to be so magnanimous. We'll stay off your top 30 list on MLB, but we want this guy." And it's this guy who is on this meteoric rise. And if Major League Baseball updates their list tomorrow, he's probably going to be listed seventh. But we're going to sound like we're being benevolent, and we're going to ask for him now because he's not even in your top 30. Right. So I think there's additionally to what you're saying, John, there's that component of negotiations where you can say, because those first of all, I don't think those lists are perfectly accurate, but they're also not daily updated. Right. They very intentionally update those periodically. If you catch them at the right time, they're lagging. And so it's an easy way just to say to a team like, "Hey, I'm not going to reveal to you what I have your top 30 list as, and I'm not sure you're not going to reveal to us your top 30 list. So let's just look at Major League Baseball's list and say, hey, we're going to be so gracious to you that we're not even going to ask for somebody in the top 30. We're going to ask for, your equivalent of Spencer Steer, who's on a meteoric rise, but has yet to touch these lists." It makes it seem a little bit more disarming in negotiations.
It's interesting that you say that, because that's one of the things we sort of bring up when the trade gets complete and we start looking at it. Everybody's like, "What? We got the 24th overall guy in their system or something?" And meanwhile, we're sitting there going, "Yeah, but what a year he's had! Like, man, would he be up at 8 now? Something like that." So that's interesting. It's interesting that John, you guys are using those the same way that we evaluators end up using them in some ways.
Well, and John, I think I just want to share maybe with your listeners one thing that really factors in within our four walls relative to what you just said. It's the reality that our primary constituent is the owner. So what happens on the flip side occasionally is there's a lot of solace as a general manager when you can go into an owner's office and say, "Hey, we got their number 1, 4th, and 9th prospects." Right. But when you guys, as people who follow the game and who are very savvy, we probably know those guys are probably arrowed down. But right. Moment in time, there's a safety in being able to tell your owner and to be able to stand up at the proverbial podium and say, "We're announcing a trade in which we got this team's best prospect according to these national lists." But in practice, behind closed doors, we criticize those lists as saying they're inaccurate, but we use them as a vehicle in that instance to kind of buoy and substantiate the trade. And then you kind of a little bit rest on this notion of like, well, you can't fault me. I got their best prospect. Right. But it's like, in practice, was in our list, was he the best prospect, or was it just according to Fangraphs?
That's brilliant.
Wow. I cannot stop myself from making a plug here because it almost seems like this entire show was leading to this moment so that I could do this. But I published about 3 hours ago my updated midseason Minnesota Twins top 20 prospects on The Athletic. So there you go. I cannot promise it is accurate in terms of what the Twins in the room would think.
But Aaron, I just want to pump that up for a second, because those lists do matter. Right? Like, those lists are inherently more accurate than the national list. When somebody, if somebody is tasked of doing, I'm sure Major League Baseball, they don't have one person doing all 30 lists, but let's say somebody has to do 5, 6, 8, maybe it's at least a division. You're focused on one team. You live in this market. You touch and feel these players. You interact with the coaching staff and with the front office. You are much more informed. Maybe we wanted to insinuate that you were not perfectly accurate, but my guess is your list is pretty darn close to the list they have, within reason. But so I think when you are a team who is trying to actually intelligently approach another team, you want to go look at Aaron Gleeman's list for the Twins rather than looking at the national list, because it's just going to be more informed.
Well, there's the clip we are pulling from this podcast to put on social media. I can tell you that right now. You just walked yourself right into that.
You're putting that clip in your apartment, and it's just going to run 24/7 for the day. And welcome to the end of this video. There's lots more. For another, just click on one of these boxes,
or click on this circle in the middle to subscribe to all of our Twins Talk.
Thank you.
Gleeman